Hello to everyone and welcome to our jungle. So this is the very first live ever in English on this channel. So I will be hosting the live with Charlie Hamilton, who is our editorial director at Story Jungle. Hello, Charlie.
Hi there.
And we are very, very, very happy to have with us today John Lombardo from the B2B Institute of LinkedIn. Hi, John.
How are you? I will raise my morning mug of coffee to you.
What time is it right now in New York? It's like
10:03.
Yeah, and what is the weather?
Weather's actually terrific today. It's almost 60 degrees. So like, what's that like? Maybe like 15, 17 for you guys?
Okay, stay here.
A fresh spring morning.
Yeah, it's nice.
Okay, so today we're going to speak of creativity in the B2B field. So the B2B Institute of LinkedIn just issued a short issue about creativity in the B2B field. And by the way, just one word to the audience to say that this is your live, as we always say, so don't hesitate to ask any question, and we'll do our best to answer all the questions. And the first question I will have to the audience is, do you feel that the content and the ads from B2B brands are creative enough? So just answer yes, no in the comment field, please. And maybe I will start with that, John. What is your take on that? Do you feel that the content and the ad from the B2B companies are creative enough?
No, I do not. And that's part of the reason we issued this recent report. I think many people have suspected that there isn't enough creativity in B2B advertising. And frankly, I think many people actually suspect the same of B2C advertising today. There's a wonderful book I'm reading now by an English gentleman named Paul Feldwick. And I think it's called Why the Peddler Sings. But people used to think that the advertisements were as good as the TV programs. So essentially advertising was just as good as TV, 30 years ago or so. And today people actively avoid advertising. So, if you were to ask yourself, why is that? I think the reason really comes down to the ads used to be very creative and very fun and very engaging and worth watching. And I think people have lost the creativity, become a bit too serious, a bit too sales oriented. And that's part of the reason that people no longer are excited about watching ads.
Well, sure. Just in terms, though, of the creativity in marketing and advertising, I mean, in the report, you're focusing quite a lot on the B2B marketing rather than B2C. Are we saying that this is a kind of an overall lack of creativity, or is it more focused on the B2C marketplace? B2B marketplace.
To be clear, there is a crisis of creativity in B2C and in B2B. The crisis of creativity, I don't think it's surprising to anybody, is much more pronounced in B2B. So just to give you some numbers to help you put this in context, please. We looked at B2B and we found that, and this is data using System 1 as a partner of ours, and System 1 has a database and they score ads. They show the ads to a panel of about 150 people. The people watch the ads. They score the ads on a number of emotional metrics and a number of brand metrics. And then they give the ad either a 1-star, which is bad, or a 5-star, which is good. 77% of ads in B2B scored 1-star. A 1-star ad generates no market share growth for you. So you should not run 1-star ads. They're actually value destructive.
So you mean that 77% of the ads provided by the B2B company are what? Poor quality? What does it mean, 1-star?
Yeah, I think what it really means is, when you think about what makes for a great ad, it's actually more about what makes for a great story. There's this wonderful idea that, I'm talking to, or I'm on Jungle Stories. So if I talk about stories, I have to imagine this will land quite well. But in the end, you're trying to reach the mind of a buyer or a consumer and have them remember your brand. So in the future, when they think about buying that category, they think of your brand first, remembering the ad that they saw. But really, we're talking about stories is what we're talking about, because the mind is not, it's not a logic processor. It's not a fact processor. The mind is a story processor. So we are more likely to pay attention to stories with people in them we're more likely to remember those stories with people in them, then we're more likely to buy from those brands that tell us those stories with those characters. It's why you see character advertising as the most successful type of advertising in the world, I would say. It's because people like seeing characters. They relate to characters. They remember characters. I mean, you know, a funny thing here is actually, because again, we're in the jungle. You know, why is emotion important in advertising? Because emotion does a couple of key things that people need to think about. You know, because we talk about your ads need to be emotional, but why do your ads need to be emotional? And there's actually an evolutionary reason for this. You know, let's imagine I'm in the jungle and I'm walking through the jungle and I see a lion, and the lion doesn't scare me. Well, I stand there, the lion comes over, the lion eats me, I die, all of my ancestors never are born, right? So emotion's powerful because emotion helps us to avoid dying, to survive. Emotion helps us to survive. And so really, like, if you put that idea in the context of advertising, emotion is doing three key things for you. Number one, it is getting your attention or directing your attention, helping you pay attention to things or decide not to pay attention to things. It's also helping you form memories. Okay, I went into the jungle, I was scared of the lion. Okay, now I can remember that I'm scared of the lion. So next time I go into the jungle, I can watch out for the lion again, right? It's a survival instinct. So it directs your attention. Where do I look? What do I remember? The lion, right? And then it informs my decision-making. Maybe I don't go into the same place in the jungle because I want to avoid the lion. Well, that same stuff is obviously still present in people today. You know, our hardware hasn't changed much, right? Our bodies haven't changed much, but our software hasn't changed all that much either. So, you know, a good ad will be emotional or creative because it does the same things. It gets your attention, right? It helps you form memories, and then it informs your future buying. So there are psychological reasons that emotion's really important, that creativity is really important, because bad ads don't do any of those things. Ads with no emotion, ads with no creativity, they don't get your attention, so they can't work if they don't get your attention, full stop. But then they also don't form strong memories, and so of course they don't inform or influence your future decision making. So that's kind of taking a big step back and thinking more about the evolutionary reasons and kind of the psychology of why emotion and creativity matters. That's the big kind of gist, I guess.
One thing I've heard a lot of talk about, and that really resonated me talking about the importance of story, is this idea that stories are the way that we understand the world. Yes. And the way that's from when we're children all the way through, it's the way that you kind of comprehend your environment, what's happening all around you, and that using that storytelling kind of mechanism, that storytelling technique, is a way to not short circuit exactly, but to kind of align with the way that people understand the world. So if your brand is telling a good, strong story, that really is it's understandable by the consumer's brain. It says, yeah, okay, I understand what I'm being told here. I'm used to interpreting those kind of messages. One quick point I wanted to ask you though about this kind of B2C versus B2B thing was a little bit about reaction, I suppose, to the report. I mean, this is a pretty, it doesn't pull too many punches in terms of, crisis in creativity. There's a lot of B2B marketers probably watching right now, sitting there saying, well, hang on a minute, John Lombardo from the B2B Institute says that the creativity is failing, that we're failing to create good, memorable advertising. Have you had any kind of bad reactions? Anyone kind of called you up and said, John, this is harsh?
No, because I don't think people are surprised by this, to be honest. And I don't think that the marketers want to produce advertising that lacks in emotion, that lacks in creativity, that lacks in humor. A lot of this is the function of the organizational design for B2B firms. B2B firms are generally led by sales, and sales just cares about making the sale. They don't care about being memorable, or they don't care about, being emotional. Or they're led by engineers often, or product folks. And the product folks are very process oriented, where they're doing design sprints and product sprints. And those things are about being fast. And they generally believe that if I build the product that I dream in my head, everybody will naturally want to buy it because it's an incredible product because I built it, And so, you have people who are either sales, kind of led, or organizations that are sales led or product led, but they don't actually understand how advertising works. They understand how sales may work, and they understand how a product may work. But the necessary precondition to getting into the sales conversation or the product conversation is attention in the first place. And that's where marketing and advertising is very powerful.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you as well about the about why there is this lack of kind of creativity in B2B. Is it then that it's like the machinery of B2B business kind of crushes some of those good ideas, or is it that like B2B marketers are kind of self-censoring, if you like, and not proposing some of those creative ideas?
You know, one of the things that marketing really does better than any other group in a company is it represents the voice of customer or the contact with customers. And, you know, sales can do that too, but that's really marketing's job. Marketing's job is to talk to customers, do research, use those research to build great products, you know, price them properly, distribute them broadly, and then, you know, develop creative, memorable advertising. So marketing's really good at, I would say, focusing on the customer, being customer centric. I don't think that sales is as good at being customer centric. I don't think product is as good at being customer centric. That's not a blanket statement, by the way. There will be some product organizations, some sales organizations, some companies like Amazon. I mean, Amazon's mission is to be the world's most customer centric organization. But most companies today are customer centric. They care about their product. They care about their sales go to market. But in the end, you have to reach customer, and the advertising has to reflect that you know your customer. You know, I'm making an ad that's creative. I'm making an ad that puts our brand creatively in a buying situation. So you'll remember not just our brand, but the buying situation for the future. But marketing's great, or should be, being market oriented or customer oriented. I don't think the other parts of the organization are quite as like that because it's not in their DNA.
Well, so, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jill, sorry.
Yeah, if I may, speaking of creativity, what impact creativity can have on performance? You were speaking of sales just before that.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think the somewhat ironic thing about, if companies can get past the fact that great advertising often doesn't have to be serious, doesn't have to be sales focused, they can actually achieve 10 to 20 times better sales. You know, if they actually cared
10
about
to 20 times.
Right. And so great creativity. And there's a wonderful paper from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute from a professor named Rachel Kennedy and some co-authors that I really like, that really opened my eyes to the power of creativity. And it essentially says that what they define as powerful creative is 10 to 20 times more sales effective than mediocre creative. And frankly, most creative, as we discussed earlier, 77% of creative in B2B isn't even mediocre. It's downright bad. So, you know, one way to interpret that is this is depressing. Another way to interpret this is actually quite optimistic. We recognize the weight of the problem. We can now go about addressing the problem. So there's a huge opportunity for firms that just want to invest more in creativity and tell great stories about their customers and their customers' needs, because that's really what great advertising should do in some sense. It's either got to be wildly entertaining or ideally be wildly entertaining and linked to a buying situation. But in either case, it has to be creative, emotional, entertaining. These are the core ways you get people's attention in the first place, which, as I talked about earlier, is the number one thing you have to do. You've got to get attention before people can process the ad, understand you have a brand that sells something, and then buy from you.
Sure. And in terms then of one of the consequences of this, if we're saying that not all, but a large proportion of B2B marketing is really kind of poor at the moment, I suppose this presents a real opportunity then for B2B marketers who want to and have the backing, of course, of the team around them to really create something that can have a real impact on the bottom line. So in terms of what this means then for B2B marketers, I presume you're saying this is a big opportunity then? Absolutely.
One of the key things all marketers should think about is, do we blend in or do we stand out? That's a very simple way to think about it. Another problem marketers, B2B marketers have, is they are too focused on their competition. So they always want to know, what is my competition doing? You know, what are they saying? How is it designed? And so they all end up copying each other, and everybody just looks like everybody else. Everybody just blends in, and there's just no advantage to that. The advantage here is actually to take the opposite approach, which is really to not care about your competitors and to do something bold and something creative and something unique. I mean, the interesting example I can give you, it's an American example, but I'll give you the names of the companies and you can go look them up on YouTube. But the insurance category in the United States is boring. You know, the products are boring. You buy insurance products that may or may not, you know, protect you at some time in the future. But it's really just kind of about a series of future cash flows. That's what you're paying, potentially have an option on a series of future cash flows. It's quite a boring product. All companies offer essentially the same product. So it's quite a commodified market when it comes to product and service. But the advertising as a result has to be wildly creative because you cannot differentiate or distinguish yourself on your product. You can actually really mostly do it through either your distribution network or your advertising. And so Geico has this gecko, and a company called Liberty Mutual has an emu. It's called the Limu Emu. There's a company called Progressive that has this character Flo. She's very entertaining, very colorful. She's very warm and welcoming, and you relate to her and remember her. And then there's a final company called Allstate that has a character called Mayhem. And this is very smart, actually. Mayhem essentially represents all the bad things that can happen to you. Your home, the roof can break on your home. You can crash your car. Your child can light your curtains or your, wallpaper on fire. But in any of those situations, what's smart is when mayhem happens, call Allstate, right? So what's nice about that is they're thinking about the buying situations that you may need Allstate for. Your car crashes, your roof collapses. And then they're showing you an ad with that. And then they're basically saying this character Mayhem saying, call Allstate, right? So it's creative, it's entertaining, it's character-led, but it's tied to a buying situation. That's kind of the magic. It's creativity and buying situation mashed up.
Absolutely. I mean, I know they always say about how memory is state and context dependent. So I presume the idea is, when your child sets something on fire, your roof calls in, you see the mayhem, you think of the mayhem, you think when mayhem happens, call Allstate. There we go. I'm repeating their brand already. I know another one.
Just one question about this example. If we take Gecko, for example, which goes very far away, this idea of putting emotion in their ad and yes. What do you think prevent the brands, the B2B brands, to doing the same? I mean, is it because they are afraid of bad buzz, for example?
Yeah, you're asking a very powerful question. I like it a lot, and it's got a very fun answer. I think companies copy each other, or marketers copy each other, be likely to lose their job. I think it's about capping or removing your career risk, because you can say if you copy AXA, for example, which is a big French insurance company, you can't get fired. You can say, well, I copied the biggest insurance company in the market. I mean, they must be very smart. So, really it's about removing risk. And the reality is there is no risk. People are worried about a risk that doesn't much exist, because a lot of advertising, frankly, doesn't work, doesn't create revenue, and people don't get fired, right? So the risk is already gone. I mean, no offense, but most marketers aren't doing a great job, and they're already not getting fired. So I don't know what people are worried about. I mean, I think it would give you more license to take risk, and it's okay to fail. I mean, if you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, part of what they are obsessed with is failure, actually. Like if you look at Facebook, and you can take out all of the kind of like conversation on Facebook, whether they're good or they're bad, one of their core principles is move fast and break things. It's basically fail fast. And Amazon, Jeff Bezos always says, if the size of your failures don't get bigger as you become a bigger company, you're doing it wrong. And so, if anything, if Silicon Valley is maybe, or should be known for something more than anything else, or the thing it should most be known for is there's a lot of they're willing to fail in Silicon Valley. They're willing to make big bets and they're willing to fail big. And more companies, more people need to worry less about failure and embrace failure more, because as I said, 77% of ads are bad in B2B and nobody's getting fired really. So I don't see what the risk actually is in the end.
We always used to
that 77% of the people who are listening to us today should be fired.
Listen, I mean, and also I want to be clear. I mean, I have made countless mistakes as a marketer. I've probably made countless mistakes already in this interview. I'm sure if you showed this to the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Paul Feldwick or Mark Ritson or any of these folks, they would, Jenny Romaniuk, they would all say that, John's actually being quite imprecise in some of the ways he's describing this stuff. So we all fail, but we learn from failure usually more than we learn from success, in fact. And so we should think of it in that way, positively.
Sure. I mean, we're just talking about kind of this fear of risk. We often used to run in some of our decks to clients this quote from Mad Men and Don Draper saying, "No one ever got fired for buying IBM." And
Yep.
this is a true principle. I mean, there is a safe path to walk, but that is not one that is going to get you sticking the memory of your audience and ultimately getting bought. So I think that's in the caching and creativity, the recent LinkedIn study. It says that brands that get forgotten don't get bought, which is completely true. So in terms of how B2B brands can really reinstate this creativity into their content on emotion before, and we also mentioned briefly also this story as a key theme. What are some of the other ideas that the brands should bear in mind when they're trying to create really interesting creative content?
Well, I think number one, you know, I'm just going to say what I said before, but you have to embrace failure. Recognize that, you know, there is no reward without risk, right? And so embrace failure, be willing to take risk. I also think it does make sense to study some of the people that are doing this. I mean, there's two kind of parts of it. There's one is kind of embrace risk. Number two is also to just read more and educate yourself more. I think one of the mistakes that most companies make is they actually don't understand how advertising works. If you understand how advertising works, then you will then measure the right things and you can be rewarded for doing and measuring the right things. So if, for example, you know, you want to get attention, well, you can measure whether or not your advertising gets attention. If you want to measure, you know, memory, you can measure, okay, people saw the ad. Did they know that it was our brand that ran the ad, right? And so these are some of the important measures. Awareness isn't really a super important measure, actually, when it comes to advertising. It's more like, did people pay attention? Did they remember our brand? Did they feel some positive association to our brand? Did they maybe understand the message? But those are the sorts of things you should be tracking. And you can track those things for yourself, your company. You can also track those for a couple of competitors, and then you can track them over time. And as long as you move those metrics over time, you know, if you're basically reaching more people, people are paying attention to the ads, they're remembering the ads, you know, then you're moving the metrics of the mind. And when you win the mind, you win the market. That's kind of how this works from a brand advertising perspective. You know, there's also lead generation, which a lot of people focus on today, but most of the academic research that we respect says that most of the job is actually your advertising doesn't much get people to buy right away. You know, at most that's maybe 5 or 10% of the market. So you may serve an ad that says buy now, buy now, buy now, and maybe 1 in 10 of your customers will buy it. But that means that 9 out of 10 of your customers are going to not through the buy now ad. They're going to come through the gecko or the meerkat or the character or the entertainment, you know, and so
well, exactly.
Your job is that.
Well, this is exactly the debate between the brand building kind of campaigns versus the activation campaigns, and this idea that the LinkedIn talks about quite a lot about, you know, your in-market buyers and your out-of-market buyers.
That's right.
And your in-market is ready to buy right now and is looking around to buy insurance, and they think gecko, they think catastrophe or whatever it was about to happen. In terms of like how budget should be split. Certainly in B2B, I think you're right. There is a real focus on like activation, like right now, let's generate some leads. Let's demonstrate a measurable impact from our campaign, and perhaps not enough focus on brand building in a longer term. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's you're being exceedingly fair. Gilles, did you want to just say something before I go off on
no, just to bounce on what Charlie just said, and to add another question to this specific question. Don't you think that also there is kind of I would say a crush in the funnel? Meaning, when you, for example, when you use LinkedIn Live, are you doing awareness? Are you doing lead generation? Now with the new format, you are doing both. And you can see this with lots of format. I mean, producing an ad, producing content. Are you really doing brand awareness or lead generation, or both at the same time? You know, that's the question. So, I mean, this is where creativity plays a huge role, because if you are doing with your creativity both brand awareness and lead generation, then the editorial big bet is a very good bet.
Yeah. Well, let me give you some actual numbers here that I think are always useful for marketers. If you have a budget, the Les Binet and Peter Field are two of the IPA fellows who've done some of the most pioneering work, at least on how to think about spending budgets for advertising. And I think the recommendation is broadly correct. I would say it's, there are ways that one might think about it differently, which I'll talk about after, but let's start with what they say. So what they say is you should spend 60% of your budget on brand building and 40% of your budget on what they call sales activation, but probably what we would call in B2B lead generation. So 60-40 is generally the rule. It's called the 60-40 rule by some people. That number is actually moving more towards brand and less towards leads, because it's very easy to do your own research online and then buy the product. So people do their own lead generation, which means the job is just to be known by buyers, right? To reach them and tell them about a buying situation. So more brand building. So I would say there's something like 60-40 could be a rule, 70-30 could be a rule. But the truth is that most B2B firms today spend the vast majority of their budget on bottom of the funnel, not top of the funnel. So Mark Ritson, a professor that we like a lot, has, I think, a very practical way to think about this. He says you should talk about the 60-40 rule or the 70-30 rule, whatever you want to talk about, and say this is actually what the research says, we should spend. But we're spending the opposite of that today. So here's a practical approach. Let's say we're spending 30% on brand today, 70% on leads. This year, let's just do a little bit more. So 40-60. Still in favor of short-term lead generation, not long-term brand building. But if we do 40-60, I think we'll do a little bit better than last year. And then if we do a little bit better than last year, next year we can do 50-50. And the year after we can do 60-40. And then the year after we can do 70-30. So most change in an organization is not rapid, it is slow. And so I think the way to think about this is to kind of move it slowly over time, not to just rapidly or like immediately change things.
I mean, one reason why I think that B2B brands spend so much budget on bottom of the funnel lead gen stuff is because of this metrics question. Because and I know this isn't really the subject of this particular chat today about, there was another study that the LinkedIn put out, marketing to the CFO, talking about how to win the backing and the money, how to talk the same language as as the CFO in order to win the backing. But I think that activation and lead gen campaigns have much more clear metrics. I think brand building, this is something we talked about before, but brand building is a harder sell because you don't have a route that says we spent this much on this campaign, it generated this many leads, and these leads brought in this revenue. Whereas a brand building campaign is obviously longer term. But how do you then win the support? What are the metrics that you can point to as a B2B marketer to win that support from like the C-suite, from your CFO to run those brand building campaigns?
Yeah, so there is one idea here we should talk about. There is a misconception, and the misconception is that only lead generation or short-term ads, buy now ads, can generate sales. But there's some really good research out of Ehrenberg Bass that shows that if I show you a TV ad, for example, or I show you a video on LinkedIn and you see the video and there's no call to action, they're not asking you to buy or anything like that, that if you see a really good ad, you will still remember that ad and go buy in the future. So a brand ad can generate a short-term sale in the same way that a lead gen ad can generate a short-term sale. The difference is only a brand ad is likely to be memorable enough to generate a sale in the short term and in 2 years or 3 years. Whereas a lead gen ad, which is saying buy now, that's likely not memorable enough to generate an ad in the short term. It's certainly not going to generate an ad in a sale in the long term. So I would say brand building actually generates short-term sales and long-term sales, actually, whereas a lead gen ad can only generate a short-term sale, not a long-term sale. And if you consider the lifetime value of advertising in that way, it becomes very clear why you should invest more of your money in brand ads or brand advertising than purely in lead generation. So that's a misconception that I want to, clear up, because I do think that, again, I don't blame people. They haven't read the academic research. It's not easy to read, by the way. But if you read it, that's what it essentially says, that any great brand ad works in the short term and in the long term, and that gives it an advantage. So, I think if people understood, if they read some more of the stuff and understood more how the advertising worked, they would have more balance around this long-term, short-term approach.
Well, thank you very much, John, for all these advices. So I see that the time is flying, and we're going to wrap up this live. But before that, maybe Charlie has what 3-4 questions to ask you, like fire chat in 1 minute.
Yeah, the rapid fire finish.
Rapid fire.
It was just so in terms of like 60 seconds, kind of 6 questions in 60 seconds. I don't know if I'll do full 6, but if you weren't a marketer, what would you have been, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I love history, so I think I would have been maybe in a different world. I would have been a history professor.
Okay. And if you didn't work for LinkedIn, which brand would you work for? Would you be working for?
I'd like to work for Guinness. Guinness is not only my favorite beer, they do some of the absolute best marketing in the world. It's a brand that's almost 250 or 60 years old at this point. There are very few brands that make it that long and do it at the scale that they do it. So I have a deep respect for Diageo as a marketing organization, but especially for Guinness.
And super creative as well.
Super creative. Fantastic. I mean, some of the best advertising in the world, best brand assets. I mean, remarkable stuff.
Okay, third one was what can you name a marketing strategy, an idea that you used to champion all the time and now you kind of regret and say, oh God, I wish I'd never said that?
Yeah, the one that I think comes to mind immediately is the idea of real-time marketing. I used to be a marketer at a company called GE, General Electric, a big American company conglomerate. And we were really obsessed with real-time marketing. And the problem with real-time marketing is it dies as quickly as it's born. So you put something out and it's dead and disappeared three hours later. And I really think clients should think more about how long something lasts for. There are a lot of Christmas ads, for example. There's one in Denmark, Tuborg is a beer there. And they've had the same ad running for 20 years. You know, there's a Corona ad for beer in the US that's been running for 20 years. There's a Budweiser ad in the UK that's been running for, sorry, Coca-Cola ad that's been running for 20 years. You know, a great ad should last forever. You know, and some of the great campaigns do last forever. Nike with Just Do It. De Beers, A Diamond Is Forever. So the best advertising lasts forever. And yet I see people spending time and money and energy on things that die within 3 hours. So I think that's just something. Time is the ultimate metric. And you want lasting advertising, durable advertising. That's how we really should think about what we do.
Sure. Time is the ultimate metric. So I will leave you with one final question rather than running through the whole 6, which is one thing you might have learned about yourself during the lockdown.
One thing I learned about myself during the lockdown, it's kind of boring, but it would be that I love running. I find running is a time just to kind of spend thinking and decompressing. And I never thought I would like running, but I've learned that I like running. And the other thing I've learned, since the French audience, I feel, you know, I'm obligated to say this, is just my love for butter has just deepened and grown. And so, you know, I love butter and I love running. And if you eat as much butter as I do, you have to run as much as I do.
You have to run. Yeah, sure. Well, listen, that's great. That is all our rapid fire questions. Thank you very much for your time, John.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Not at all.
Thank you very much. And I promise the next time we do a live together, I will switch on the light in my setup because it's off right now. I'm in the shadow. Anyway, thank you to all of you to assist for having been with us during this live. And see you next time. Actually, in 2 days, because we have another live like Thursday morning at 11:30. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.